Well, I don't know, we discussed a little bit earlier when this news came out at midday about the latest BBC report. What we've learnt, of course, is how much the big stars are paid, but not all the big stars. We've also learnt from Tim Davie, Director General of the BBC, that he's apologised for the allegations of abuse that have been going on, and some actually sort of admitted some video footage on Strictly and between dancers and contestants. He's also announced that the BBC are going to get rid of 500 full-time staff. Oh, that's a lot of people. They've got a full-time staff of 21,000. It's a drop in the ocean in terms of them actually kind of cut the actual number of their staff they've got on the payroll. Let's talk about this with Rebecca Ryan. She is, of course, campaigning director at Defund the BBC. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Julia.
Thanks so much for joining us. Let's talk just first of all about big stars' pay, because that's what all the headlines are going to be about. And as always, the likes of Gary Lineker, he's the top earner. He gets 1.35 million as a presenter of Match of the Day, Sports Personality of the Year, and of course covering all the major football tournaments. Zoe Ball, Alan Shearer, Greg James Radio 1 also make the top 10. Huw Edwards, amazingly, is still one of the highest paid stars in terms of the last year's figures, but that's because although he was suspended in July 2023, allegations of misconduct for many months, he was still on the full payroll. He was on around the £475,000 mark. We don't get the exact figures normally, do we? Get a range. But the key thing is we never know about some of the biggest earners, do we? Because we don't get to know about their earnings because they're in the commercial arm of the BBC or they're paid through a production company. So we kind of focus on a few people who are the big names who are paid directly by the BBC, but the rest of them, well, to a certain extent, given that these figures are being used to bash people around the ear with, we give them a free pass.
Absolutely, and this is the thing: is that the British people who are forced to pay for the BBC if they don't want to watch BBC content, are not given the full picture, and that's really disappointing. We had Graham Norton, didn't we? I think a couple of years ago, was complaining that the details just aren't accurate because you're given a half picture. If you're paid directly by the BBC for some of your work, then you'll get below that. The barrier that needs to be disclosed and otherwise, so they don't have a full picture. And the thing is, what's the motive of showing this? Is it to show full transparency to those that are forced to pay for this? And in which case, yes, then it should all be out in the open, and let's see who's getting paid what.
But there is an argument, isn't it, with the BBC? If everyone knows how much our people are earning, they know exactly how much they can offer to try and woo them away. That said, we've seen many a big star wooed away from the BBC, and it rarely seems to work out that well for them. Even though it's big sports presenters, big breakfast show presenters, they end up on Channel 5, and then funnily enough, they don't take their viewers with them. They bring in viewers, but if you're sitting on the BBC sofa, you bring in the viewers because you're Channel 101. And it doesn't actually in terms of taking the audience with them. But again, look at the names. Michael McIntyre I mentioned, Bradley Walsh, Alex Jones, Paddy McGuinness, Claudia Winkelman, Tess Daly, all of the judges on Strictly, Romesh Ranganathan, Alexander Armstrong, Richard Osman, Lord Sugar and Graham Norton, all believed to be some of the highest paid stars, but we don't know what they're paid. But do we really strictly have a right to know this? Look, the BBC have got a budget. It makes no difference to me or to you as licence fee payers whether or not Michael McIntyre or Gary Lineker are paid 1.3 million or 1.4 million. My licence fee is going to be the same. The BBC has got a figure that they have to spend. They don't cut their cloth. They have ridiculous over-expenditure on loads of things. I've been in the BBC enough times to tell you. I can tell you, you could sack half the BBC today. You'd see no impact on programming whatsoever. Look, we had our brief sojourn into TV here, and the amount of money that is wasted on people who are just sitting around is quite extraordinary to me. I mean, absolutely extraordinary. But does it matter to us what these people are paid?
I think it matters when it's people like Gary Lineker who are using the platform that's given to them by British taxpayers to make huge political points on places like Twitter. And I think that's when people really get outraged when they can go, look, this is the guy who is paid this huge whack from the license fee. And in that case, we're going to be more outraged by the fact that he's flouting the rules and the contract with the British people that is set in the Royal Charter. So I think in that context, absolutely, it's relevant. But as you say, if they were to get a pay cut or, not get a raise in line with inflation, but the license fee is going up, then people start to say, well, what are we paying for here, because we're not feeling like we're getting value for money. And we're not watching a lot of this content because it's just so woke.
Oh God, that's the main thing I would want. Just pay people extra to not do woke stuff. And people, again, it's like Kamala Harris, isn't it? It's just like appointing people because they tick a certain box. It does seem to me, though, people get very angry about people on the BBC earning big money, get very angry about people in the FTSE 100, chief executives earning big money. Everyone seems very relaxed about footballers being paid a fortune, pop stars being paid a fortune, film stars being paid a fortune. People seem to pick and choose what they get bothered about.
I think, certainly in this instance, though, I think people are outraged because they are forced to pay for the license fee if they watch any live broadcast TV, and that's where they feel uncomfortable. It's like, you're making us pay for this because it's supposed to be this public service broadcast and you're doing as a public service, and therefore these salaries shouldn't be through the roof.
That's fair. And also you do get so much kudos from having done it. What do you make of Tim Davies' announcement, the director of BBC, that his apology following these allegations about Strictly Come Dancing? He says he said he apologised to people who's had an experience that hasn't been wholly positive. That's wonderful management speak. Inevitably says there'll be competitiveness, hard work and the will to do well, but there are limits and the line should never be crossed. We will never tolerate unacceptable behaviour of any kind, he says. Do you think that is going to cut the mustard as an apology? Because we've got a string of allegations. I mean, some denied, some admitted. People have gone. There's some talk about axing loads of the old style, or the old sort of gang of Strictly dancers who had no allegations against them, but just to sort of start again.
Yeah, I think the problem that comes down to the BBC's they kind of always circle the wagons. He said here, we will reflect on what has happened, but the show will go on essentially. And that's, problematic when we're being forced to pay for it. If people will just turn off in their droves because they aren't satisfied with this or they aren't happy about these allegations that have been going on in the background, then, they would be free to do that if it was being funded by advertising, what have you. But at the moment, there's no repercussion for this behaviour. And that's where people get really cross, is that they can't sort of vote with their feet. And so saying we'll reflect on is not really good enough, because we've seen the BBC do this again. We've seen them do it over numerous scandals, haven't we? Yeah, absolutely. Really good to talk to you. Thank you so much. Rebecca Ryan, Campaigning Director at Defund the BBC. Chris Parry, your thoughts on this? Because a lot of the Strictly story is obviously separate from the BBC stars. But again, it all ties in, as Rebecca says, with people feeling, well, but you force me to pay for this. You tax me to pay for this, but I don't really get a say.
Well, it's very interesting, Julia. All the people whose names you mentioned, I don't watch any of them on the BBC. I'm a licence fee payer. Yeah. We're not supposed to watch all BBC. I mean, I don't watch Match of the Day, but I don't mind paying for Match of the Day. But, the only service I use... Although I think Match of the Day would be on if there wasn't a licence fee. Indeed, but the only service I use is In Our Time with Melvyn Bragg. Yeah. So I pay my licence fee for just one radio programme a year. So that's the problem I have. I think you're right. I think quite a few of these people have been thrown out as sacrificial victims to shield the really big earners. And I get very sceptical when I hear management speak saying this sort of behaviour will never be tolerated. Yeah. Well, you've just tolerated it. The idea that nobody knew, and that's what you get, is like what was going on with ITV and Philip Schofield. Jimmy Savile. Yeah, Jimmy Savile. Actually loads of people knew. Again, Russell Brand at Channel 4 and at the BBC. Everyone knew. And these highly paid stars, of course, are in turn protected. Yeah. So there's a culture of dependency on these stars where they get too big to either be sacked or to behave. Absolutely.